everyone. Thanks for coming this afternoon to this workshop organized by D3 during the Innovation Week. We are very pleased to have you guys here as part of the D3 community, and also to have Space Syntax that will provide an overview of their methodology and how their software and their principle applies to new development, both in existing project or brand new project. The whole project that we are going to discuss today is Creative Community. For the one of you that are not familiar, we are going to provide a brief overview, but it's basically the model that we have on the back that I hope you had the opportunity to see today or during the previous meetings. And what I would like to also mention is that we want the session to be interactive. So if there is something that is not clear or you want more information, I'm happy to jump in and support Amy during the presentation. We have also 1 hour workshop, and we are keeping Q&A for the last 30 minutes. But if there is something that you want to ask before this, please let us know and we'll make sure to arrange. I would like to introduce Amy, that is part of the Space Syntax team that is coming to Dubai for this workshop. Amy, please, we would like to welcome you from Dubai Design District, and thank for your time and for putting together all this very insightful workshop for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Michaela, for a wonderful introduction. So my name is Amy, or Amy, you can call me Amy. And so I come from a company called Space Syntax, and we had a great opportunity to work with some group of people from D3 and share our methodology that could potentially be used for Creative Community as well as other projects. So let me take you through in the principle of what we do and what we did in the training workshops and how that can be useful for Creative Community. So I just mentioned this. The purpose of the workshop is to introduce our unique science-based and human-focused approach to the planning and the design of urban areas and the buildings, and how this will contribute to the development of the creative community. So that is the main theme of this workshop. So first of all, why science-based? It's science-based because our approach, the key part of our approach, is using the computer simulation and analyzing the spatial network. I will come back onto this so that you understand better. But so basically, it is a computer-based simulation. And the next point is why human-focused? It is because we use these technologies to think about how people might use space and how people move around. So we also do observations of movements and behaviors. So it is not just kind of theoretical computer-based analysis, but it is really pretty much about thinking about people and how people will experience the space. So that is the key element of our approach. So why is it important? Because movement is the lifeblood of cities and buildings. So without movement, there's nobody, people will not be able to move around, and the movement generates social interactions and social communications and economic transactions as well. So the movement is a driver for social and economic activities of cities and the buildings. This is why the movement is very important. And what our approach does is to try to explain why movement patterns are how they are and how is that related to spatial and physical conditions. So what is space syntax? So space syntax is a way of measuring how well connected streets and spaces are in cities and buildings. And this is called spatial accessibility. It provides a way to measure and compare how the street network or circulation system relates to the way the city or a building works. And the impact of a space, the primary impact of a space is movement. The way that we analyze space can explain how people move around. But it does not stop there. It also explains how land use patterns are affected by this spatial accessibility. And it also explains how economic vitality can be influenced by how streets are connected to each other. And also there is an implication for crime. At certain types of crime, for example, robbery and burglary, tends to happen in a certain spatial conditions. So we found a way to explain those things. And also it relates to carbon emissions. So eventually the environmental sustainability issues, because certain geometry, certain way of streets being connected together can encourage walking and cycling better than some other parts of the cities and spaces. So in this way, we can try to reduce the carbon emission by designing cities and places. So a little bit about space syntax. We are basically, there is an academic background to what we do. So we were part of the UCL, and we have been pioneering urban modeling techniques. And so the way that we work is that, or the way that we use this approach is that, first of all, we use this approach to understand the existing conditions, or given provided conditions, to see how things are working in cities and spaces, and how are they influenced by spatial and physical conditions. And by understanding the relationships between those two elements, we apply that understanding to think about the design and the future scenarios. So what if you design the cities, part of the cities in this way or that way? And what is going to happen? What is the movement patterns are like? What are the social and economic impacts of this one design or the other? So these are the things that we bring into projects and work with designers and other project team members to think together. And another aspect of this approach is that this approach can be applied to any scales. So it's not only about cities, but it could be as big as countrywide, or it could be just one small area, or it could be even buildings. So, and also it's in terms of buildings, it could be any types of building. So how do we do it? And I'm not going to take you through the very technical side of things, but I would like to introduce very briefly the foundation of our methodology. So what we do is the key part of our input is a spatial network analysis, which means that we represent the space with either lines or squares or different formats. But so we basically use a map and represent the space, and we use our software to calculate the relationships between spaces. The reason why we do this is because we found that network properties, so how spaces are connected to each other, is the key driver for movement patterns. And so in order to understand the important elements of space, we analyze the network property using our software. And that property can be calculated for different scales. So we can say that, okay, so if the journeys are made between all spaces to all spaces, what is going to happen? So that's one measure that tends to represent or highlight the accessible routes, which are for cars and the long journeys. And when we limit the calculation to smaller scales, then it tends to represent the more pedestrian routes. So this is the foundation, and I think it's easier to show you an example of how this can be used. So this is an example, a part of London, and so what you can see on the right is a representation of a street network of this area. So you can see that the streets are represented by lines. And the colors represent the calculation, the result of the calculations, and the warmer the color is, more accessible it is. So you can see that there is a quite accessible route to the south of this area, and this is called Euston Road, which is a very heavily trafficked street. And so there was a proposal for this empty area to develop a block of residential buildings. So someone came up with this idea, this sketch, so almost like a grid structure and loosely connected to the surrounding area. So what is going to happen to the movement potential, movement patterns, if you do this? So we put this geometry and we calculate the result. So the result was this. As you can see, that development has all blue lines and, well, mostly blue lines. And the other thing that you might notice is that the colors within the development are not very different. So what it means is that this whole development is, first of all, segregated from the surrounding area. It's not going to be very accessible. And the other thing is that the fact that there are not many different colors, so all the lines parallel have similar colors. What it means is that it is very difficult to understand the structure of the space. So it doesn't make much difference when you're on one street or the other, because the number of lines which are connected will be the same. The only difference is that whether you're on the edge or in the middle. But there's not much of the hierarchy, especially if you can compare this part with the surrounding area, which has different colors mixing with each other. And you can see that where the high movement potential is compared to some others. So it doesn't create a variety of space. And this means that if this is a residential development, it means that there might be some risk for antisocial behavior, because movement can be spread out to any lines, any streets, any routes, and it's difficult to structure the movement, and it's likely to make some dead ends or corners that people cannot see, and that makes spaces unsafe. So how about creating different geometry? And so, for example, the lines represented in black. So let's connect this development to the surrounding areas. So what is going to happen? And it's quite difficult to see. Unfortunately, this was a PowerPoint, so it was animation, but so it's a bit difficult to see, but you can see the lines of the colors of lines underneath. So you can see that there are some colors, red and orange, like strong, warm colors are created. So these streets, which are connected to the wider area, are going to have very high movement potential. So is that good? If this is a residential development, do you really want to have the highly trafficked routes just on the edge of your development? Probably not. So this is a tool. Our tool is to help some design decisions, but it doesn't give you an answer. It still needs interpretations. But what it does is to enable you to think and see, and the things that you might feel intuitively, if you're a designer, you might be designing with intuitions, that you might be thinking about this and anticipating these things to design, but you can actually add the science to it and share the ideas with other people so that to ensure that you're on the same page with other people in the project. And there is another way of, another kind of type of analysis, but the essence is the same. So this is an example of a museum in London. It's called Tate Britain. And the one on the left-hand side is observed movement. And the entrance is in the middle at the bottom. So what we did was to observe people for 10 minutes from the entrance. So these yellow lines are traces of people. So these are the things that people did in 10 minutes after they entered. And the first thing that you realize is that there's a concentration of movement in the kind of the spine of the building. And the right-hand side of that spine is quite empty compared to the left-hand side. And so the museum had concerns over this behavior. They have noticed that people are not really going to these right-hand side spaces, and they have the most important piece within their collections in these rooms, these empty rooms. So they're wondering why that is. Why are they not seeing this masterpiece? So they came to us to ask for help. And so we did the spatial analysis, which is shown on the right-hand side. And again, the red means more accessible and better connected, and blue means that more segregated and difficult to get to. So immediately you can see that the empty areas has very cold colors. So it wasn't actually the masterpiece which was a problem, but it was actually space. The space was very difficult to get to. So people were responding naturally to how spaces were arranged and did not get to see the masterpiece that they might have wanted. And we also use this tool to test different scenarios. So one of the advantages of this methodology is that it's relatively easy to test different scenarios because it's a desktop study. So they were thinking about an extension of the museum. So this was one of the options. So what is going to happen if they extend it in this way? And this was the result. Okay, so how about adding another extension? And so on. So in this way, finally, this area that was very segregated started to have warm colors because it started to be connected to other spaces. Oops. And we can test a different scenario. So how about connecting this way? And then it will create completely different structure. But this new connection, north-south connection, started to take over the weight from the original entrance. So is that really a good thing? Again, this is something to think about. It doesn't give you an answer, but it allows you to think whether this matches with your vision and what you want to achieve. So now, let's move on to creative community. So creative community, this is a document that I took from the document produced by D3 and Foster's and Partners, the main architect who is leading this project. And so the vision is a world-class creative community for the Middle East that promotes and nurtures up and coming design talent and establishment. In addition, D3 will also act as a global destination for the design community, attracting and encouraging all aspects of design innovation. So this is the vision. What is important when we think about movements and experience of people who use the creative community is that, first of all, it is a creative community. So what it means for the space, we need to think about, but it's an important part that it is to accommodate the people who does some sort of creative activities. And the other thing to be noted is that the vision for this area, not only creative community, but the whole D3 master plan area, is that it is aimed to act as a global destination. And so the catchment area for this area should be the whole Dubai. You shouldn't be thinking about the just neighborhood, but you should be thinking about how this will be located in Dubai and beyond. So this is the current plan of the kind of visualization of the current plan. And so the creative community will have a variety of spaces, including the people who will be working there, the design offices, and people who are actually making things in workshops. And some people might be selling things. And there will be some food and beverages to support people's activities. And there are going to be some retail that attract people from wider area context. And the design idea involves creating some courtyards and connecting that through the main boulevard. So this is what we did in the series of workshops we had in the last a day and a half with staff, a group of people from D3 and some other people who are involved in this creative community development. So first of all, so what is the spatial conditions that support creative communities? So what is necessary for the creative community? That's what we started to think. Good accessibility to attract a range of people from everywhere. That is very important. So if this was an international, global destination, we need to think about how do you access here from the airport or the hotels, and every other place is from Dubai, what's the relationship with downtown and so on. And a clear local structure to nurture local economy and the local community. It also acts as a community on its own. So it needs to have some local economy and also local community, which means that it wants to have an identity of its own. And the other thing which is probably challenging for everyone, or any of those projects, is that it's a lower cost. To allow startups and low-income earners to survive and thrive, and how can we achieve it without compromising the quality? That's always a challenge. And good public spaces and amenities to enhance social interactions and innovation and creativity. So for innovation and creativity, social interactions are very important. And it's not going to be planned meetings. It's going to be spontaneous, just starting from the chat between people who are doing different things, being inspired by each other. These things cannot be planned, but it can be facilitated by creating a certain space that might encourage people to bump into each other. So this is another important part for particularly creative communities. And also flexibility to allow creativity express and exercise. So if it's already fully designed, a shiny office, is that going to be best for creative people? They might want to start doing things. So the design should allow this flexibility for those people to be able to make some changes and adapt and experiment and so on. So for this project, to think about this creative community project, we used some kind of principles and tools that we, as Space Syntax, have developed over the years through working on various projects. And this is one of the tools. It's a useful tool to think about development and how we can improve or make changes. And it's actually, we are kind of playing with the words as well, because there are 5 L's. It's just easy to remember. So the first 2 L's, location and linkage. So these are the site potential. So where is the site, and how is the site connected to the wider context? That gives you a potential of the site. If the site is located in the area there is no infrastructure and there's no plan of infrastructure, how are you going to be able to attract people to the site? So that's a disadvantaged site compared to if you have a site in downtown. Everything is there already. You don't need to worry about the infrastructure, and so on. So location and linkage is very important to think about the potential of the site. And then the question is, how does the design exploit the potential of the site? So for the proposed developments, there are 3 elements to think about: layout, land use, and landscape. By layout, what we mean here is a spatial layout, how circulation spaces are laid out, how things are connected to each other. And land use is basically a spatial use. So where are the retail units, where are the food and beverage, and where are your workspace, and so on. And by landscape, I don't only mean the fountains and greenery and things like that, but also like what's the surface, where the street furniture, the benches and so on. These also contribute to or relates to how people move around and how people experience the space. So these are the questions that we went through, and I'd like to introduce you what we discussed, but this came from this morning. We had this kind of last few sessions just this morning. So allow me to look at my note from the morning session. So the first two questions, the site potential. We started to look at the site potential. And so where is the site, and what are around it, and how people access the site, and from where? And in terms of linkage, how is the site connected to wider context? So we started to look at this. So this is it might be a slightly old map, but this is the map of Dubai, and I'm sure you're much more familiar to this map than I am. And so this is one of the examples of our analysis. So this is, again, representing a street network of Dubai, and using our software, calculating the relationships between spaces. And what is represented here in red, the warmer color, means more accessible. And in the cooler colors towards blue, it is more segregated. And in this image, what is shown is that when journeys are made between all spaces. So as you can see that in red, most of the motorways are highlighted. And by the way, the site is highlighted, these three master planning sites is highlighted in pink near Dubai Creek. And so what you can see is that immediately is that the site is very strategically located. It's surrounded by the motorway that connects this site to downtown Dubai or Deira to the north and Dubai International Airport to the northeast. And also it brings you to the south of the site, which are currently being developed, or probably some of them have already been developed since this model was made. And to the east of residential areas as well. So the site is very strategically located, and let me just see my note. And also, in the future, this water, the creek, will be connected to Business Bay and creating the loop. And so the water taxi will also provide additional way of accessing the site from the north of the site, and also there might be some tourist cruise sort of things connecting the sites to Deira and downtown as well. But then when you look at this, so this is a local accessibility measure, meaning that when you limit the journeys to very local scale, in this case, of 15 minutes walking distance. So what are the spatial conditions locally? And as you can see, that the site disappears from the map. But that's because the currently, or at that time, when this model was built, there wasn't enough routes being developed. There wasn't enough streets developed, so it disappears from the map. But interesting that you can see is that old town of Deira, which has a very interesting color ranges, like a lot of red and warm colors and some blues, so there are a hierarchy of spaces. So this is interesting to also understand how areas are working around Dubai, and to think what are the spatial conditions that we want to create, and what are the characters of space that you would like to achieve. So let me also go through other elements of that we discussed. It's probably better to move on to this. So the other thing that we discussed was that, so the motorways would provide main access, and then that will be coming on to the route to the eastern side of the site. So that is going to be a very important part of this design. And we also discussed, I'm not going to go into details, but we also discussed the relationship between this creative community and phase 1, which you're currently in. So this cannot be designed on its own. It needs to be part of this whole D3 area. And in particular, then its neighbor of this phase 1 is going to be very important. And even though the creative community will have a very unique identity, but the idea is that it shouldn't be exclusive. So people who work in this phase 1 development should also be able to go to creative community to get lunch or to do their shopping and so on. And the same for the people who would be working in creative communities. We want them to also come here to attend the event and then do some shopping and so on. And so these interactions are very important, again, especially for creativity. These social interactions of different groups of people are very, very important. So what we were trying to do at the workshop, what we discussed a lot about in the workshop was how we can create a space where the passages of different groups of people are mixed. Because we cannot force people to interact and have just strangers to have coffee and then, okay, let's just have a creative conversations, because that's what you're meant to do. You cannot do that. But you can create a space where they might bump into each other. So that's one of the things that we were trying to do at the workshop. And then moving on to the actual development. Let me do that. So the questions that we asked were, in terms of creative community layout, how does it respond to the wider context? So we know where the main access will be, but how does that relate to this wider context? And what spatial structure does it create? So the spatial structure is very important to organize movement. So we were thinking of different user groups, so what this structure will do to employees. What does it do to event visitors? What would it do to shoppers? So all these scenarios, and what is going to be happening in the morning? What will be like at lunchtime, or evening, or when we have special events, and so on. So all these scenarios for different groups of people, the one set of spatial layout has to respond. So it's a very complex process, but these are the things that we were discussing at the workshop. And how space use distributions respond to movement potential and spatial hierarchies. So the space use distributions, there's certain uses that need some footfall, for example. The retail units that are located at the location where naturally quiet are not going to sell things much. And it might be because of the location of car park, or it might be very far from drop-off points, and it could be various reasons, but the space can help certain uses to take advantage of what they have. And the other question is, how does public space design, for example, courtyards, support movement and social and economic activities? So these are the questions that we were asking when we were reviewing the current proposal and thinking about the way forward. And so there are some examples that, let me go through. So at the end, what we kind of set as principles that we would like to achieve includes, well, we'll go back to the linkage issue. So the first of all, enhance the connections to the wider context to improve access to the site from all directions, and especially with the phase one. So we've set as a principle that it's very important to create a good connections with the phase one. And also we discussed a lot about creating a legible structure, meaning that easy to navigate for people. People do not feel that they would get lost or anxiously checking the map all the time. So we don't want that. We would like to create an environment where people can actually walk around without looking at the map, just enjoying the experience and still get to where they want to go and experience a lot of things that they might be expecting from a creative community. So we discussed a lot about wayfinding issues and also convenience, that how can we create a very convenient spatial conditions that when you park the car, when you arrive by car, and then you park anywhere, and you can get to where you want to be without going through the underpass for a long time or anything like that. And the other thing was that courtyard can be used, is a best means to facilitate the social interactions, especially for creativities. So this is where we should envisage different groups of people together and interact. So how can we facilitate it? We need to put cafes and bars and or restaurants and things like that, and also probably put some benches to facilitate these interactions. And also the shading would be very important, because in summertime people won't be sitting in an outside space without shading. And yeah, so I think these are the things that we discussed at the workshop. And so, yes. Uh-huh.
You have this greenish color when you did the residential block. And I just want to understand if there is a relationship between the color pattern and the land use of the city.
Colored pattern and?
The land use of the city.
Yes. So yes, thank you very much. It's a very good point. So when we look at the cities, there are certain uses which are very relevant to this spatial hierarchy. So you will see a lot of retail and catering, so restaurants and bars and cafes, on the relatively warmer colors. It means that they need footfall. So they tend to be located at highly accessible routes, whereas the residential tends to be either secondary or tertiary, like more segregated space. But when it's very, very segregated, I'm not sure if you know the word cul-de-sac. Yeah. So when it's a cul-de-sac, there is a risk of burglary. It's still not an ideal, And that's for another reason. So the city needs, say in a plain language, the city needs blue lines. City needs hierarchies. But it's, how to say, this one, the problem was that not only because it was blue, but more because of the lack of structure within the development. Does it make sense?
Yes. Can we shift to the next slide?
Yep.
Okay. Now, I have this question that you see this long arrow coming up diagonally. It turns red, although it's moving between blue and a light green color. Why it turns red?
This is, so this, I should have said that this model is a cut-off of the much bigger model. So what you can see here is a very, very small part of the very large model. So there's a continuation of this road to the west. Yes, it makes sense. Thank you.
Another question, actually. You mentioned that the cafes that are not in the warmer color, it will not sell well. Is it the other way around, that you place these cafes at the places that are not, there is no footfall there, so it actually adds people to it?
So it works to a degree.
Yeah.
But if you are putting money on it, I would suggest you to be very careful. So what we tend to do, and also we have a really good example in the City of London where the density is very high. So you might think, a lot of people think that whatever you do, it works. It's just people are there, like overflowing people. But there was a case in a very strategically located, I think it was not a department store, but it was a big store. And yes, it didn't even last a month.
And even though it used like anchor shops, that you know that it has a footfall.
It depends on the context. So if there is no other choice, and if it's related to what you offer is related to necessity. For example, if it's the only one department store in the whole city, that might work. But in a city where there are 10 shopping centers that offer similar things, that might not work.
I'm a little bit scared actually about applying your computer algorithm on something like Dubai, which is still in a very fast changing process.
Mm-hmm.
The road transport authority in many ways is unpredictable. They might change things from one day to the next, and they might screw up your entire planning ahead. I mean, you're aware of certain changes which are coming up, but I think on a local level, you might be successful with this to really help plan D3, but I wouldn't count too much on the overall model here because people find their way through the city.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. I just have a lot of doubt by letting an outside party who isn't even familiar with how the city has grown over the last 15 years help to plan, or even the culture, even the multicultural society.
Yes.
Keep in mind, 80% of the people who live here come from somewhere else in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Can help make this successful and not run into risks which you've encountered
Yes.
in other places around the world.
Okay.
It's a very unique scenario here, so
No, it's a really good question. And let me say, what? Planning?
long it's been application?
It's been around 26 years since
Well,
the company was established.
Well, the program has been there for that long, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Then you've definitely done follow-up on the plans you've
Yeah. Yes.
implemented, right? So, what were the feedback, or how accurate were you on your?
Okay.
So
Let
this
me.
is-
Yes. No, that's a really good point. Thank you very much for two of you. Okay, let me clarify a few things, and let me address your point first, actually. So, this is not, by no means, this is not a focus model. This is purely the spatial properties. So we're not saying that we can predict the movement patterns accurately, but from the studies, we know that there is a good degree of correlation. So based on that, we can think about potential. So it highlights the risk, or it highlights the opportunity. But of course, the actual movement can be influenced by so many other things, like the overall density. If there are not many people, you're not going to achieve the same movement levels as you can see in some part of London, or like in New York or in Tokyo. So density is definitely a very, very big factor. And also the land use distribution, as we were just discussing earlier, that it's also influenced movement to a degree. So that also relates to that. And also the capacity of the road, for example. So these things are not taken into account. But this, and we have, I have to say, I don't want to sound like I'm kind of defending, but I have to say that what we showed here is a very, very small portion of what we do. And we have, over the years, that we have been developing our methodologies. And what we do now, what we can do now, includes integrating this with other information and creating an integrated urban model. So still, I'm not going to say that, oh, that's very accurate, but it reflects all other parameters as well. So that's something. But also, I think the still important thing is that it's a system model. So it shows the hierarchy. It doesn't give you an answer in terms of the movement, or this is what is definitely going to happen. It's a design decision-making tools. So it highlights the risk. It's based on certain assumptions, and you need to understand these assumptions to understand the limitation of the model. But no model is perfect. But it could be still very useful, because these spatial network properties that you experience, you do, I'm sure you do experience that in some areas that you feel comfortable walking around without a map. In certain areas, you're constantly feeling that I need to check the map. I'll give you an example. I don't know if anyone can share this feeling, but it's a personal experience, and it's a very, very silly experience. So I went to New York probably like 5 years ago for the first time, and I was very, very excited. I was, of course, thinking about shopping, all these cool shops and boutiques, independent cafes, and all these things. And I went with a friend who is not very interested in cafes or bars or anything like that. And she was like, yes, I'm happy to go anywhere. And I was like, okay. And then I had a map, but it was kind of cold, and I didn't want to check the map all the time. And so we were walking around. We were in the right areas, like Soho and things like that. I knew that there were some shops that I wanted to go to. And we were walking around, and then it's a grid system, as probably all of you know. It's a grid system, and you think that it's easy to navigate. You're not going to get lost. I never lost that, which way is the north up. I knew that always that way is the north and that way is east. So I thought I was very comfortable. So I wasn't looking at the map. And then I was walking around, And then deciding, oh, okay, oh, I see some people there, so let's turn here. Oh, I see some, like one shop that they might be interesting, oh, let's turn here. We did that, but I was very disappointed, I have to say, that, is this New York? I was expecting more from New York. So I was saying to my friends that when I came back, person from New York, and said, how was New York? And I said, it's not cool. I prefer London now. And then I had an opportunity to go back to New York with someone I knew. And then, of course, I recognized some space. I've been there, I've been here before. So I was definitely in the right place. She took me to the area from the same point, and then there were so many shops, and I was like, okay, this is New York. It's not that New York has changed and developed all the shops in between. Just, I wasn't there. And why does it happen? Because it's a grid system which doesn't differentiate the routes, because there is no hierarchy. I know I'm going closer to the middle and I'm getting far away from the middle, but apart from that, what's the difference? It does the same thing. Is that right? So it's not intuitive. I couldn't navigate intuitively. So I needed to know, I had to check the map to know where exactly the shops are, the shops that I want to go, and then had to make exact that turn. I couldn't expect space to bring me into the center because there's no center. So this, it's a personal experience, but this is the sort of things that space syntax methodology can actually quantify and visualize so that people can understand the same thing in the same way. So that's the tool. It's useful for design, and it's not necessarily to say that, okay, so now you can build this width of the street because we know that this is going to happen. We're not saying that. The other thing about cars, what you were talking about, this, especially in a wider city-wide context, you had some concerns, and you were right. So there is still a correlation. So we find relatively high correlation between our spatial accessibility model and pedestrian movement patterns. The correlation between spatial accessibility values and vehicle movement, still there, but it's lower, because the car movement tends to be dictated by traffic rules, congestions, people start to avoid congestions, especially nowadays there is a sat-nav, tells you, where the congestions are and the people start to avoid. So one thing that I can say is that it is a good indicator, but it doesn't give you, it might be less kind of reliable in a way when you're only talking about car movement. So again, I have to emphasize that this shows the potential, and it's spatial potential rather than traffic. But with this integrated urban model, what we started to do was what that can do with the development of technology is that it actually adds the other information like speed limit, and capacity. So number of lanes and directions and things like that. So these are things that we started to add on in the system.
One other thing about your presentation, you're talking about pedestrian, is that Dubai is a car system.
Yes.
End of story. No people. That is absolutely so. Anybody who starts to do accessibility to me, talking about having this young idea is totally disappointing. The next slide has 2 lines on it, which terrify me about movement. I was moved 70 people in next door in a month and a half.
Sorry, can you repeat?
I was moved 70 people here into an office next door in a month and a half. They are going to have extreme difficulty in getting here. So there's no question to you, more than you free, is why are we engaging in this process now and not 3 years ago? We have a serious issue with big three in terms of micro and macro accessibility. I'm not getting you talking about putting And so it's, I really want to hear. The accessibility to the tree, which is appalling. The issue is Garden Bridge, Festival Bay Bridge, which is covered in grey. That's where most of our people go through, just where by international airport. It's about getting people here on a day-to-day basis. It's not about me bouncing off my colleagues or whatever. I've got 70 people. I'll have 90 people in 4 months' time. It's real problem like that. I face the fact we're going to lose staff if they can't get here. So that is
Yeah.
a real issue. It's not motoring best cafes. It's
Thanks to the support of RTA, we open another entrance from Financial Center Road. I hope many of you are already familiar. Plus, there is another entrance from Old Meta Road. So, we started with one, and this thanks to the joint effort with the RTA and the development team, we are now with 3 entrances. Of course, considering that we are not even 1 year old, I believe it's a major enhancement. Sorry? The word.
No, I'm sorry. I also have to leave in a few minutes. I wish we had started a bit earlier, but I feel your pain. I'm also moving here with my team. I've been in Dubai for 10 years, and I've seen how quickly this place adapts to problems. And yes, D3 is absolutely brand new. They've already worked on it. A year ago, roughly, we've been sitting together. We've been trying to figure out ways how we can get 30,000 people here for one weekend, for the Meet D3 weekend. And it worked, even though it was one. We had so much contingency plans, alternative routes that we were thinking about of getting people here. We were so worried. It worked out so well. So I think from a capacity point of view, it will take some time until this place really fills up, and then you're going to start feeling the congestion. It's more the traffic lights of the road leading here. It's more the rush hour traffic coming from other roads, which is a problem. But this is not something that D3 can resolve, and it's also nothing that Syntax can resolve. This is something that the city itself needs to deal with. And looking into the future, the next few decades, Dubai is going to experience so much congestion that the entire city needs to rethink its entire strategy of localizing, centralizing people in certain areas. So even I live in downtown. I live 2 minutes away from here. Yeah, so I want to reduce my driving distance to this place. I will, of course, urge my employees to do the same thing. At the same time, D3 will grow into a community where you'll have residences available. Sorry, I'm not doing advertising here, but it's we discussed this already. I almost see this as, it's almost becoming a little city in itself. And this is how most of Dubai is going to have to be in the future in order to avoid these traffic routes. And I think, I just want to take it from the traffic back into the local problems. There's 2 more comments I want to make now, adding on to this. 2 things. We are more and more becoming dependent on these little devices here. So I don't think you're going to have this romantic vision of people walking around an area without a map. You're going to have these glasses on. It's going to navigate you. It's going to steer you right towards somewhere through advertising. So there's so many ways to bring people to places. So this whole, how can we activate spaces? It doesn't apply anymore. The cul-de-sacs could be the coolest places, and especially in a creative community, and this is my last comment, especially in a creative community like this, creative people don't like to be like everyone else. We don't want to be sheep, we want to be the herders. We want to be the ones who develop new things. So I think, especially here in D3, you're going to have to come up with something a lot smarter than, finding ways where you can put in cafes or restaurants or bars or shops in order to activate it. So on a local level, I think you need to work very close. Or D3 also needs, especially D3, I think you need to really think what kind of the community are you going to have here in the future, and consider, I think, more of us being part of your workshops. I feel you've done a lot of work here. But we're only seeing a presentation of an outcome. I would have loved to have been involved in this further, especially also because we have been working on you guys for a year through the events and other things, and I was working on these buildings and planning everything, and I was aware of a lot of the issues. And the first comment I ever did, more than 2 years ago when I started working on these buildings, I told them, guys, you don't have roads to get here. That's going to be your biggest problem. That was the first comment I did to TCOM. All right, that's it, thanks.
So,
It's a very interesting observations. Can I just go back to the slide of DERA?
this one?
That's it. You see the red lines that exist in the top left corner, the old DERA on both sides of the creek. That is actually the D3 that always existed. Dubai is a very innovative, very creative community. It all began in that area. And to some extent, D3 already exists in Dubai. And what we're talking about today is a regeneration, rebirth of D. D3 is nothing new in Dubai. Dubai itself is a very creative place on this planet. And the reason we've got this D3 now is more for the transspatials, the people who fly across the space to come and to transport their new ideas. But Dubai is actually a very creative place already. And the reason it is those very, very hot spaces right on the neck of the creek. And that's where the D3 and the creativity of Dubai already exists. Just a comment.
Yeah, thank you. Before I forget, can I address the points that gentleman made who's gone? But the one thing about the smartphone navigation, because that might be something that you might all thinking about. And we have a lot of debate about it, especially now, I'm sure in Dubai in particular, that people are talking about smart cities and future cities and all technologies and things like that. It's not only individuals, but the cities are thinking about the way they work to revising and then use more technologies. So a lot of people say that, yes, this is going to change the whole way of people moving around. Okay, to a degree, yes. The Google Glass and things like that might actually even eliminate the needs of looking at the map and things. So that's really useful for navigating when you know the destinations. But what about exploring? And how about the spontaneous activities? I mean, how do you know that what you want to do until you see it? So the important thing that I still think that it might be a fantasy, it might be a very idealistic view, but as someone, my background is architect, so someone who deals with the space and the people, that there is an interaction between space and people. It's not only that people decide what to do with space, but space also informs you and inspires you. So that's something that we are dealing with. So we are trying to capture the elements that what the space do to people, as well as how you can manipulate the space. So that's one element that I wanted to emphasize. Sorry, is there any other? Yes, please. Can you?
I was saying that it's good to analyze because you said that D3 disappears when you put the pedestrian map. So, okay, it's a good observation, but is there any action? Like, we knew that. Like,
yes.
I had a friend who was in Dubai Mall, and he said, it seems I'm 10 minutes away. I can walk to you.
Yes.
And I told him, forget it, because no, he's not going to get to me by walking.
Yes.
Because
So,
we're trapped around with highways.
yes.
So,
Yes.
is there any action? And the other question is, are you going to also talk about creative community by itself? Did you analyze it?
Eventually.
No?
That's something that we discussed, but it's the design is ongoing, And we just finished the workshop this morning, and then it's not something that's kind of concrete. So we didn't, and also we have limited amount of time, so we didn't get a chance to talk about it. But that's something that these three will be continuously working on.
Basically, this workshop has been designed specifically for the for the Innovation Week, because we want to link the three with as many of you are aware, Sheikh Mohammed announced the Innovation Week recently, and we wanted to link something innovative also in the urban design space, and we think that space syntax is a great example for that. This is not, like the end of the engagement that we are planning to have with space syntax. Actually, and thanks also to Amy's direction, if we can go back to the D3 master plan, the slide. Okay, so basically when we started engagement with them, we were thinking of optimizing the creative community itself. So this box that you see here in the light pink color. After the discussion, we understood from Amy and also with Foster, that is much a broad scope that we have to work together, that actually will include the overall master plan. Even if we now, like we have more visibility of what's going on phase 1, that is here already completed, and creative community, and we are now addressing both the residential and the waterfront. Now we are understanding the importance of planning, this interaction, this accessibility from this stage for something that down the line for me is a 2020 plan. So it's not, like this was specifically done in light of the Innovation Week, but it's a dialogue that we want to keep open with space syntax. Mostly embrace the principle that they are used for this space interaction, and make sure that we align those principles in our overall master plan.
To address the first point, so the question was that whether there is an action. And that's a really good point as well, because what we were saying that by looking at that map that this one, is that without anything else around it, it's going to be an isolated island. So there's not much to talk about, apart from the internal structure. But if you really want to talk about the pedestrian movement patterns, or even like a car access to this creative community in a more realistic sense, that it needs a wider development. And so the master plan is there, so the thinking is there, that something will be happening, but we just don't know how it's going to be yet. And so that's why, as she was saying just right now, that we need to think about all these things as a context together.
Talk about wider development, and I mean, this area of Dubai this area of Dubai is actually it's growing quickly.
Yes.
We're going to have Dubai Greek Harbor.
I'm sure, yes.
And just across the road, we're going to have further development.
Yes.
How are you stitching that into the master plan for P3? Are you taking that on board?
So just one clarification is that this model wasn't particularly developed for this workshop or anything, because it was done years ago for another project that we had an opportunity to work for. So the base of this map is very old, so it must be missing a lot of things.
It's just kind of how you're going to handle future development.
Yeah.
You keep talking about it from the press, and as the gentleman said who's left now, Dubai moves at such a rapid
Yes.
speed.
Yes.
I mean, I've worked in London. London's a nightmare because everything is
Yes.
slow, and we have time.
Oh,
We can,
slow, okay.
Dubai is tough.
Yes, yes.
And so you have time to react to change. Here we don't have that.
Yes.
luxury. So it's great that we do this analysis, and this actually, I think, does have a value. Exactly as you said, the interpretation. It's not a solution. But I think what the model needs to do almost is actually somehow incorporate future expansion.
Yes.
If that's
It's a kind of
it's a question still.
yes.
But
No, that's
seem to do that at the moment.
That's absolutely right. That the way that we usually use this model is to test these future scenarios. The advantage of this methodology is exactly that. You can actually know the spatial hierarchy, so that's the potential, not the reality, but you can predict certain things to a degree for the future scenarios, any given future scenarios. So it's just that you need to kind of have in mind that, okay, are we thinking about 2030 or are we thinking about 2020? And then agree on what kind of developments that are going to be there in that scenario. You add them in the computer, and then you can simulate the potential impact of those.
And is that something D3 are doing?
I'm speaking for this timeline and this time frame. The next step is something, of course, we will identify internally. I personally believe that as per now, I think it's already challenging as a timeline, look at the overall D3 master plan, but definitely your input is correct. Maybe, this I'm thinking out loud, this type of initiative should be taken in collaboration with, in a broader Dubai scope, maybe, and this our, capabilities also to lobby with RTA, with Dubai municipality. Maybe D3 also is a trial is a pilot and a trial for smart city, as you might be aware. This might be a trial also for an engagement of this type, and then can be developed across the city.
I think that's definitely what needs to happen. I mean, the interaction with PM. PM knows what's going on. We're in there daily. They know what developments are happening in Dubai. They have plans. They know where places are coming online. You almost need to space interact, whether that's TCOM, the guys pushing it into PM, need to be interacting on that much larger scale. Because that's one thing Dubai doesn't have. Dubai doesn't have an overall master plan. We're developing clusters. And then subsequently we try and stitch things back together. And that's where we fail. That's where Dubai as a city fails. So maybe there needs to be something, and TCOM would be one of those entities that could do that. If I go in there, I'm an architect.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Actually, we are going to have a private session with our group CEO, Dr. Amina Rustamani, she's already a strong believer on this technology, and she's very influential, within the Dubai government entities. So this is also like something as our next step is to engage the management, engage the board, to show the validity and to show the insight.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be very interesting for us.
Maybe Space Syntax will open an office at D3 then, maybe.
Yeah, if I may, could you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. This was my second question, actually. She just mentioned, are you guys planning to open an office here?
Well, it wasn't particularly a plan, but we operate very internationally.
All right.
So with or without office, we're happy to work in Dubai or elsewhere. And yes, but we actually, at the moment, we are just 23 of us in London, and we operate like across the world.
Yeah.
So yes, but we are growing as well, so let's see.
One more thing, the filters you mentioned, or the layers.
Layers.
Yes. Now, how micro can you go, or how close can you go?
The scale?
Yeah. Scale-wise.
It depends on, it depends on the space. So what we do is that, as I showed you earlier, so do you remember the Tate Britain example? So that's another type of analysis. So what we do is that we change the methodology depending on the scale and depending on questions. So when it's a small scale, what kind of scale are they thinking of? Like if it's an internal space or a room, if you want to analyze this room, the line-based analysis is not going to be useful because it's just one line. But this more kind of tile-based analysis with a lot of colors. So that's going to be useful to differentiate the character of the space from this corner to the center. The center is more integrated than the corners and things like that. So we have a kind of variation of methodologies.
All right. I am not a designer. I don't come from a design background. From a business point of view, though, could we apply such, methodology on where to select an outlet in a mall, for example, or
Yep.
in a city or a small neighborhood like this, and based on the industry of the Southwest, for example, if it's hospitality, food and beverage, or it's I don't know, a clothing shop, or regardless.
So the type of tenants, do
Yeah,
you mean?
but in a shopping area or in a city like this, a small neighborhood like this, or a very closed community, just like some of the residential communities we have, do you guys, I mean, could
Yes.
your system actually go all the way to that?
Yes.
Can I, from a business point of view, can I actually benefit from that? Can I
You-
come to you from a business point of view? Can I come
Yes.
to you and say, okay, I am investing on, I don't know, healthcare, yeah? And I am focusing on 3 areas. Can you help me from a healthcare point of view? Where should I open? What streets? What corners of the neighborhood?
So so our kind of service works in a very different range of stages of things. So, for example, we do site appraisal. Depending on what you do, you want to have certain conditions for the site. So, looking at the site and then accessibility, like potential access, and kind of the uses in the vicinity. You know, what are the operations that you are going to do, and is that the best place? Or if you have like a couple of different sites, so which are the best sites for what you want to do, for example. And so that's one thing. And in terms of kind of shopping centers as well as high street sort of things, we do both of them. And what we normally say is that the logics are not very different. Although there are some specificity, because shopping centers enclosed, so there are certain exits, only certain exits, whereas in urban areas might have more permeability. But still, the principle would be the same. So we worked in, I don't know if you know, sorry, I don't want to kind of use a lot of examples from London, but because we have high concentration of projects in London. So the area like Covent Garden, which is a very shopping area, or Sloane Street, which is another type of shopping area, which is a very high-end, with the Christian Dior and Prada and all the Chanel and things like that. So these areas, as well as a lot of UK shopping malls in Cardiff and one in Glasgow and Blue Water and things like that. So yes, we do have experience in those. Was there anything that I missed?
No, I mean, I just wanted to know if an investor is interested to open an outlet, could you guys help him when deciding where actually, what to choose in a specific area? So if I come, I'm interested in D3. So if I say, okay, I come in D3, and there are, I talk to the people who rent out or lease in D3, and they'll give me several places to select from.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know.
Yes, you don't know how to choose.
I know my
Yeah.
business, but I don't know which one of them should I choose.
Yes.
So who could I could refer to you guys, because
Yeah.
I can assume what to do, and this is what we do with business. We assume this might be a better place, but
Yeah.
we don't have a scientific
Yeah.
base we can build our selection on. So
Yeah.
this sounds interesting.
We can equip you with a more science-based knowledge.
Well, one more thing. Now, I'm sure that your methodology has a lot of factors in it. Do you consider culture factors in different places? Because you say you work in different parts of the world,
yes,
but you're based in UK, and I'm sure you have
yes,
staff from different nationalities,
Yes.
yeah, who are familiar with different places.
yes.
But then Dubai is a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I don't know. It has some culture. I'm from Abu Dhabi.
Mm-hmm.
I have a house here in Dubai, and I go back and forth, and it's 160 kilometers away. It's a different world.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very interesting.
Yeah, and Dubai has its own culture. So you would need someone who lives in Dubai
Yes.
to be part of your team,
Yes.
because it is just different. You can't.
I understand. Yes.
You can't base your assumption
Yes.
based on
Yes.
other metropolitan cities.
So yes, the cultural element is very, very important, and that's one of the reasons why we tend to do observations. And because it's not only it's, of course, it's more important when the different countries, but even different areas, certain things are very different. People in Covent Garden might behave differently from Sloane Street. The interesting thing that in Sloane Street project that we worked on, that the shop wasn't really dependent on footfall, because the people who shop in shops on Sloane Street, they have chauffeurs. They're dropped off in front of it, and then with very high heels, they'll just trot into the shop, buy things. They don't even carry things, come out, go back to the car. So the very important things about the design was actually to provide drop-offs, and for the chauffeur to either park there or to spend some time and then come back when this person finishes shopping. So it's a very, very different needs and demands. So we always respond to the vision and kind of brief. So what are you trying to achieve? And the culture. So these are the things that we try to, because otherwise there's no point. So we try to respond to these things by observing and or listening to the clients. It's the client's communication. So when the culture is so different and pervasive, then probably we need the local partners or local people to tell us and collaborate and develop ideas together. So what we can offer certain things, but the use of that technology or methodology involves interpretations. So that has to be done in a collaboration with the people who know what they want to achieve and like a specificity of patterns as well.
I think if there are no other questions, we can conclude this session. And maybe, okay.
I just want to stress what Richard suggested, that here in D3 you have end users that are knowledgeable in that sense. Like you have special end users here.
Yes.
We're architects, designers, so you have to involve us in these workshops so that because again, it's a rare coincidence that we are your end users and it is our field of expertise at the same time. So I stress Richard's point about involvement.
That's definitely something. We have done several focus group, maybe more with the creative, like artist or fashion designer. It's very important also to get your view, guys, as architect, interiors. So we'll take this point, and definitely as soon as we progress more with the detailed design, we have, more options to test, we'll make sure to involve you. Let's say Q1 2016, because now we are a bit, busy, but definitely we'll organize something. Thanks for your ideas.
Okay.
Thanks, Aime, for your workshop. In any case, we will be around a few more minutes in case of one-to-one questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for your time and listening.